wanna go home. Oh, you can see me on Levi, Judah and Zebulun, Isaac, Gordon, Asher, Naphtali, Joseph, and Benjamin. 12 tribes, so we want to go home. Oh, children, home. Oh, to Zion, oh, I wanna go. Oh, children, home. Oh, take me home. Oh, I wanna go. Yeah.
Good evening to our Q95 listeners. A pleasant good evening to you. We're coming to you live from the studios of Q95. So again, a pleasant good evening to you. I hope that your Wednesday is going very well. You're having a great Wednesday evening. As I mentioned before, we are live in the Q95 studio. If you've been with me for a while, you know we usually do the program Roots Connections on Q remotely from Atlanta, Georgia. But it is great to be home. It is great to be in Dominica. I'm here on vacation, and so I've had the opportunity to come to the studio to be live on Q95. So welcome. Our guests are already here, and we're grateful that they're here on time. We have Dr. Byron Winston. We have Mrs. Jodie Dangleben, and we also have Mr. Hadley Joseph. So let us know if you're hearing us. Let us know if we're live on Facebook as well as YouTube. So welcome to Roots Connections on Q for today, Tuesday, June 8th. 2022. I am your host, Simone Mathieu, and today we are looking at sustainable development. So, what is the cost? What is the price of sustainable development in Dominica? And what can we do to sustain the environment while we aim to develop our country, Dominica? So, let us go ahead and have our guests unmute their mics as they say good evening to the audience. Ladies first, Jodie.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Simone. Thanks for having me. So my name is Jodie Dangleben. I am a civil engineer, civil and environmental engineer by profession, and also the CEO of JD's Naturals, where we produce natural, organic, handmade hair, skin, and soon to come household items. We try as much as possible to incorporate sustainable practices in our business, in all our processes, or manufacturing or procurement. So every aspect of my business, I tend to make it as sustainable as possible to preserve the environment and so forth. So
yes. Thank you, Jodie.
Tonight.
Yes, it's lovely having you on the program this evening. Thank you for being here. Dr. Byron Winston. Unmute your mic.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Simone, Jodie, and Hadley. As you mentioned, I am Byron Winston. I'm an environmental scientist with expertise in water quality and right now working a lot on renewable energy. The last few years, I've focused on cleaning up contaminated environments using nature-based solutions and nature-based engineering practices. I have been away for a while, but always looking for an opportunity to contribute to development in Dominica, whether it's on the academic and educational front or otherwise. So thanks for having me here tonight.
Yes, and thank you for joining us. Mr. Hadley Joseph.
Okay, good evening. My name is Hadley Joseph. I'm a landscape designer / urban designer in the United States. Currently, I'm from Coolibistry, and I'm also a former city planner where I worked with a specific city in North Carolina on the development process of that city. And like Dr. Byron said, I too am one of the people who always want to find some way to contribute back home. And I appreciate you reaching out to me and asking me to be part of your program. And I look forward to having a great show with you guys. Thanks.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you for everyone who's joining us via the Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and on Q95. So again, we have in Tampa, Florida, Dr. Byron Winston. He's a senior environmental scientist. In Dominica, Mrs. Jodie Dangleben, civil engineer, as well as the CEO of Jodie's Naturals. And as well, we also have Mr. Hadley Joseph, who is a city planner and landscaper. So again, good evening and welcome to the program. And thank you everyone who's joining us on Q95. Don't forget, if you're listening to us and you would like to see the video of this program, you can hop on over to Q95 FM on Facebook as well as YouTube. And we are also going to be live on Push Past 10. So again, Q95 FM on Facebook and YouTube, and Push Past 10 on Facebook as well. So we're looking forward to engaging with our audience as we always do on Roots Connections on Q. So at about the 9 p.m. hour, we'll be taking your calls as well as looking at your Facebook comments. And again, we say good evening to Mr. G. Lambi, who's here in the studio with me, as well as Sherwin, our engineer who keeps us connected. Don't forget, you can always view all of our past programs as well as listen to the radio live on q95da.com. So again, our website is q95da.com, where you can listen to us live. You can also follow any of the previous programs that you may have missed. For example, Roots Connections, the last program we had was the graduating class of 2022. So they talked about their journey, their inspiration, their hopes for the future, and they also talked about their concerns. So that is now playing on q95da.com. So we're going to jump right into the program. We are very happy that our guests are here. So I want to start with you, Dr. Byron, because I think it is so important for us to understand what is contamination and what is pollution. So with the work that you do, help us to understand what we mean when we talk about pollution, contamination of our waters. You're muted.
Well, we can get very technical from a chemical standpoint on what the makeup of water is, but I want to do that. What I will say in terms of contamination and pollution is anything that makes our water unfit for the use that it is designed for. So, for example, when we use our rivers and our lakes for recreational purposes, there are standards by which we should be able to enter the water and not worry about getting sick, not worry about getting any diseases, etc. When we use lakes and rivers for drinking, there are standards that have been set so that when we do ingest those waters, they're not we don't get sick. So contamination and pollution from a broad perspective, a broad sense, is anything that makes a resource unusable for the intended purpose that it is usually set out for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And Jodie, I want to come over to you because you mentioned that your business is all about sustainable development. But even before we do so, we know that you are a lady who continues to receive awards and accolades for your products. And especially, I think you just received one surrounding sustainable development. So kind of just tell us about your efforts and your awards regarding sustainable development.
Sure. So I can't keep track, but I think the most recent one locally, that is, was from an inaugural Green Summit that the NDFD, the National Development Foundation in Dominica, held. We were supposed to come up with a green idea and pitch it. And so I came up with package-free products, cosmetic products. Why? Because when I did some research, I found out that Labas, our landfill, is past capacity. It was supposed to be decommissioned in about 2019, I believe. And currently, my products are housed in plastic containers. So no recycling facility, no large-scale what do you call it, reuse of those plastic bottles, my little business was contributing to climate change. My little business was contributing to global warming. And so I took it on my own to find out what could I do in my business to actually curb that. And so I came up with the idea of package-free cosmetics. So I came up with shampoo bars that doesn't need any wrapping or bottles. Also, we can house conditioners in a solid form. You can do lotions in a solid form. So I did some research on that to sort of I would want to say eliminate totally my use of plastic containers in my business, and also to source other eco-friendly and biodegradable containers and packaging for my business.
Excellent. Sounds like a great idea. Hadley, let me come over to you as we get the conversation started this evening, and just tell us a little bit about the work that you do as well, and why is it so important that we plan our urban areas, we plan our business areas so that we have a balance with the environment?
Well, so one of the things that I said in my master's thesis project was I thought that the work that I did, landscape urban design, is somewhat still connected. It's God's creation, and how it's somewhere where we have to live in, right? An urban space we have to live in. We have to make changes to it to accommodate us human and how we live. But at the same time, it's God's creation and we cannot modify it too much. And so basically, landscape architecture, urban design, and planning, pretty much what we do is there's certain laws that we have to follow as to how do we develop that place. And but as Dr. Byron said, there's a lot of standards that you have to follow. For example, one of the most important things in urban design is how do we deal with stormwater management in a very urban place. And apart from storm drains to pretty much wash the water away, we employ the use of a lot of bioretention facilities. And how do you treat the water on site, or how do we reuse that water instead of just sending it into that bioretention facility? So the whole planning of an urban area is very important. And I like doing it, I like designing it, I like planning it. And it's something that we have to take, I think, more seriously back home, because I think the city is very, like I was talking to Jodie a while ago, and she was saying that how the city is very congested. And so if we employ the use of urban planning and urban design, then I think we could have a much better urban spaces back home.
And one of the things I want you to talk to us about later in the program was the program that you did, the project that you did on the botanical gardens. I think you had a project that you did in terms of how we can get better use of the botanic gardens. So I want you to talk to us about that later. But let's get into our program and let us talk about, we're just going to have an open discussion. We're going to talk about the long-term impact of the current approach to development. So do we see any particular strategy where development in Dominica is taking into consideration that balance, that delicate balance between development and protecting the environment? What are your thoughts on that? And anyone can go.
Simone, I want to jump in before we get too far, because there are two important things that occurred at the start of the program. One, your introductory song was Mathieu Fontaine, and he spoke about moving from Genesis creation. Hadley also mentioned that urban design is a God's thing. And, such development, protection of our environment is a moral, but also biblical responsibility that we have. Because back to Genesis, early on in Genesis, in chapter 2, it says that, God took man, placed him in the Garden of Eden, and said, yeah, go ahead and work this land, but also take care of it. So we have both a biblical and a moral responsibility, moral being in terms of, ensuring that our children and children's children have safe spaces and places and an environment to grow and enjoy like we have, but but also we have a biblical responsibility as well. Just wanted to throw that in there because it seems like we are all connected to that, based on the introductory song and based on what you said as well.
Yeah, great observation.
And just to touch on that, that phrase that I created. So the topic of my thesis project was pretty much landscape architecture and urban design, a fusion of art, design, and nature to further accommodate man's desire to be one with God's creation.
Very powerful. Yeah. So Jodie, over to you.
Yeah, so just my take on it. I think we have not been very good stewards of the earth over the years. And I think we haven't quite grasped the concept that we take care of the earth just like the earth takes care of us. We think like we're two separate entities. Some people think that way. And so I think it really starts off from a young age in the schools, especially from as early as preschool, to educate. I think even today I went on site and the number of just water bottles that are strewn all over the place. And it really hurts me because we don't really understand the negative impacts that our actions have on the environment and how that now in turn affects us. So I think that's my stance on it, that we really need public sensitization on the importance of taking care of our environment. It's our home. It's our only home. We have no plan B. And people don't understand that. Mars is not habitable as yet.
Right.
We have no plan B. And so we need to take the same way we take care of our homes, of ourselves. We have to take care of our environment. That is where we live. That is what feeds us. That is what nurtures us. So I think we need to do much better for our children and for the future generation.
Right. And Jodie, let me stay with you while you are on the floor, you're on the mic. Do you see that other businesses are following suit in terms of what you're doing, leaning more towards sustainable development? Or do you think there's a price, an additional cost to the business that kind of deters them from going and even considering sustainable development? Because it's almost like you have to go back and research, as you did, how to make, shampoo into a solid form so you no longer need the packaging. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, and given the economic situation now in Dominica, a lot of people are not looking towards sustainable options because obviously they are more expensive. That is the reality. In terms of my raw material, my plant-based materials are much more expensive than the synthetic ones. And so a lot of people in business are looking to obviously make a profit. And in so doing, they tend to go for the cheaper options. But for me, having a sustainable business was priority to me. So if my price point has to be more than what people are accustomed to, then so be it. There are people who are conscious and are making the effort now to consume and to use products that are safe for themselves and safe for nature. And so I think I maybe set myself apart and created my own niche. But I think a lot of people are now coming on board. There are different organizations now that are pushing for businesses to recycle, to reuse. And so a lot of people are being now sensitized on the importance of having sustainable businesses, of taking care of the environment, and even some of the financial institutions, when they do have grants, they always ask for businesses where that sustainable component is added in. So they're driving businesses now to head towards that sort of grant.
Right. And guys, keep in mind, anyone can jump in the conversation. But as Jodie was speaking, something that came to mind, I was thinking, well, what about maybe government incentives for businesses to leave less of a carbon footprint? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Jodie, kind of some incentives to get our businesses to look towards sustainable development, because I always think, the earth is not something our children inherit from us. The earth is something we borrow from our children. Because whether we believe it or not, the kids are gonna inherit the earth after us. And what are we living for them to inherit? So guys, feel free to jump in. Do you think there should be maybe government incentives, some kind of incentive to encourage businesses to adopt sustainable development goals? And what should be those sustainable development goals?
Well, I was gonna, after Jodie finished, I was gonna jump in and say there are three things I think that matters: leadership, personal responsibility, and economic situations and incentives. We cannot leave protection of the environment solely to the government, nor can the government leave environmental protection solely to the people. Because, like Jodie mentioned, your economic situation, sort of dictates some of the decisions you can make in terms of your spending power. So the government, on one hand, has to put in some type of incentives for people who are businesses who are consciously making an effort to protect the environment so they can decrease their price point so that people can afford it. People, on the other hand, have to make a conscious decision to purchase those products like the ones that Jodie are making, but also make simple decisions such as, plastic bottles, putting them up for recycling if we do have recycling, and doing it the proper way. I belong to some groups, and I get a large number of photos of people dumping stuff every and anywhere. I mean, the consequences those have for the environment can be tremendous. I get photos of people throwing stuff, chemicals, hazardous chemicals, petroleum-based products, just all over the place that can get into our groundwater, get into our surface water. So there has to be that level of personal responsibility as well. So leadership, personal responsibility, and economic drivers. And I think the government has a big part to play in terms of the policies that they establish and enforcing those policies, but also putting in the economic incentives for the populace to be able to purchase those products.
Yeah, and just to touch on Byron and Jodie's point, I also think it's been a lapse in certain things, like in schools, teaching kids in schools. I remember growing up as a kid, that saying, keep Dominica clean and green, keep Dominica clean and green. And we had that everywhere. And then every community, every little nook in a community had a garbage can. Some of them used to be blue, some used to be black, some used to be green. And then we knew that there was a certain day that the garbage truck would come and pick up. And then so it was something that we knew we had somewhere to dispose of our trash back then. It may not have been the best, but there was somewhere. But like Byron said, like you see right now, people just disposing of their trash anywhere and not really caring, because there's no form of, they're not being reprimanded for it. And I think another thing that we have to look into when it comes to hazardous materials is how close do we allow people to construct any sort of structure near a large body of water. I mean, we already have a lot of the farms close to those waters, and we have those chemicals dripping from the soils to allow pretty much, let's say, a garage 15-20 feet from a body of water. That in itself is so bad. So but for me, my thing is protecting the rivers back home. I'm from Kulibistri, and I've seen how the river has changed due to natural causes, but also man-made causes, and I guess we'll go into that later. So I just wanted to touch on that for a second.
Yeah, and while we have you on the mic, Hadley, let me ask you this as well, because one of the arguments could be, well, we adopted our current plan in terms of the plan of the city, the planning of the villages from centuries of what was already there. So is it even a conversation at this point that we can have about planning and sustainable development? Is there even room for that conversation at this point? If we have already adopted, Dominica, they're small spaces. So we've already adopted all these buildings that were already there for generations before us. So is there even a conversation to be had about city planning?
I mean, yes. I mean, one scenario I had at my planning job was certain things that are grandfathered in because it existed prior to the new UDO. And so if it existed prior, then yes, it can remain. But if, for example, that the owner of that property wants to make any changes, it now has to abide by the new plan. And evolution is something that we cannot just think that evolution is all about technology. It's not just about technology, it's about planning as well. So if we used to design, or if we allowed certain things to happen back in the 70s and the 80s, with information, with technology, and new habits, and the whole idea of protecting the earth, we also have to improve on our planning. So I think yes, because look at the amount of homes that we've lost because we allow people to build so close to the river, and then during the hurricane, what happens?
Yeah, Byron, Jodie, any thoughts? You're muted.
You're muted.
I agree wholeheartedly. The thing is, I think consumerism is what is damaging our environment. Gas, food, clothing, furniture, water, everything, toys, electronics. I mean, the key is not really to stop consuming so much, but to make better choices and to be mindful of what we consume. But then again, it stems back to, as Byron pointed out, our spending power and being able to afford these sort of things. So I think it comes full circle, and sensitization again is important. And it's not difficult, it's really not difficult or inconvenient to become more environmentally friendly. I don't think it is. I just think you have to make that conscious decision to change your mindset. And the policies, again, are important because when you talk about incentives, I know that there are some duty concessions that they have on the port. If you're bringing in anything, whether it be solar panels, water tanks, that sort of thing, anything related to renewable energy, they have duty off on these items. So I think it's a step in the right direction, but there's still so much that we can do on that front.
All right, Byron, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, even in cities that have already been established for decades, hundreds of years, whatever, there are still opportunities to, like Hadley was saying, to retrofit them and to be able to do it, sustainably. We have, there are things. Hadley made a good point in terms of technology and stuff that we were doing in the past that might not work for now. But there are a lot of things we used to do in the past that used to work and used to work very well. And we allowed technology to move us away from a lot of those things. And now we're trying to go back to it, right? As sustainable practices. Up here, everyone wants to put rain barrels outside their house, right, to catch rainwater.
In the US.
Out of necessity in Dominica.
Yes.
We used to do that just because we needed to do that.
And imagine, Byron, I was coming home to Dominica and I called my cousin. I say, make sure the barrels are full with water because, I don't know if the Huasca is going to take the water.
Exactly. And that is a sustainable practice.
Yeah,
so,
we
used to do things where we used to use organic fertilizer, the stuff that came out from the plants that we cut and stuff like that. We just put it back outside and allow that to fertilize the soil. So we used to have all these sustainable practices that we used to do, and we moved away from it. And now we need to try to get back to it. And like Jodie saying, it's not difficult. It actually saves us money in the long run. I remembered my cousins and my uncles who are Rastafarians using hibiscus leaves and stuff to wash their hair and to get their locks knotted and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, Jodie knows about that.
Exactly. So we have all these sustainable practices and all these things that we used to do that we moved away from that we need to get back to. And there needs to be, again, personal responsibility and leadership to help us get back to that place.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've been impressed with is listening to the government talk about the building codes that are now being put in place for buildings going up in Dominica. But it kind of just begs the questions, and I think Dr. Byron, you alluded to this, the importance of having almost sustainable development goals. Like what should be the goal be, Jodie, for businesses? What should be our goal be, Hadley, for planning? So I think if we have goals that our businesses and our builders and our people can aspire to, then it kind of gives them some direction. Because I think sometimes when we say sustainable development, many times people will be like, well, what's that? Right? But if we provide the specifics, exactly what can you do to move us towards sustainable development, then I think that is what is helpful. So do you have any ideas on some goals that we should aspire to as we work towards preserving the environment and developing our beautiful nature island, Dominica?
Well, I can go for in terms of my business. I think the goal really of environmental sustainability in any business would be to conserve our natural resources, first off, and maybe to develop alternate sources of power. That is so. In setting up my business, I made sure that I set up a room for my batteries, even though I don't have the money to buy it right away. I intend to use solar power for my business. As well, I have a huge cistern underneath my house, so Doasco can hold their water. There's enough rainfall in Dominica that I can use for my business. I only have to put a filter on and I'm good to go. So we have everything there, but we've become so dependent on the municipal water supply, on Domlec for electricity, that we forget that there are alternate environmentally friendly ways that we can get electricity and water. So I think that is the goal, that to conserve our natural resources and use alternate renewables energy sources without polluting, that is one, and without harming the environment. So for instance, in my business, when I do my herbal macerations with my herbs and my leaves and all these things, I use it as compost to grow my other herbs that I need later on. You know what I mean? So it's a cycle. So you don't throw away, you reuse, you upcycle, so for instance, even with my plastic bottles, I've told people, if you want some more product, just bring it in, I'll refill it for you instead of discarding it and buying another bottle. So I mean, that is what we have to have in our minds as business owners, that we preserve the environment, we don't pollute, and we don't harm the environment. And that should be our guiding principle. And once we have that in mind, then everything will fall into place in terms of preserving the environment, I think. Business. Yeah.
Excellent. Goals, guys. Goals. What are the goals? Specifics.
I think one thing we can maybe put in place is some sort of credit system for construction, especially of like commercial buildings. Like for example, in the United States and pretty much around the world, there's a credit system where you could receive a gold status or a silver status, and you get some sort of credit. And I think in Dominica's case, it could maybe be like a tax break. If you design a building that maybe based on some of the materials that you use for construction and some of the elements that you add to that building would help it reduce consumption of electricity by 15-20%. You get some sort of credit in the form of a tax break to maybe import way more solar panels than usual, or for example, the reuse of rainwater. We just have that running down the drains, or we could use that to flush our toilets. We could collect that water, use it to flush the toilets and stuff like that. So if there's some sort of system where this guy who wants to build a 5-story building for his company, where he could say, okay, if we do that, it may cost a little more upfront, but there is something that we're getting back to ensure that we don't pretty much spend too much. If there's a credit system that would, give back to the owners of those structures. That would be good. Another thing is we keep, we cut down trees everywhere, and I don't see anything about replanting trees. There's, the system where you have a rain garden or on your roof, where you cut down the trees down on the ground, but you plant some, and you get to collect some of that water and use it in a rain garden on your roof, or something like that. And you're going to prevent runoff. So all the water that would be running off your building, it is now collected and maybe growing a nice garden. The company could have, let's say, a vegetable garden that employees could, So, and another thing is, for example, electricity and light. We build buildings back home with a few windows when we could maximize the use of natural light, at least for pretty much the most part of the day. You have as much natural light coming in. And I remember doing studies in architecture school as to, okay, where is the best place to put windows on that structure based on the summer solstice, and where, how the sun moves throughout the year and whatnot. And I don't think that's something that we pay attention to that much back home. So I think them working on the building codes, I hope that's something that they pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Jodie, like you wanted to add something.
Just to add on that, I think we don't have enough enforcement when it comes to that. Because we have trained architects, but because, again, spending power, to engage an architect is more expensive than to engage a draftsman. And so the draftsmen are not trained in what you just talked about, Hadley, in terms of orienting the house, orienting the different rooms so that you maximize the amount of light that comes in. Mm-hmm. That is not done. Sometimes the house is designed and the draftsmen have yet to set foot on the property. So I think more enforcement when it comes to that should be done, but unfortunately, that is not being done here.
Yeah, so are you saying that it's important, it's good that we have the building codes, but the question is, will they be enforced?
Well, the codes speak to more in the building, actually, in terms of, for example, what screws to use, the distance of your purlines, those sort of things. But I don't think they speak to who actually designs the house and how the house is designed. I guess that is more of a personal choice, they believe so.
Interesting. Byron, I'm sure you have lots of thoughts on what we're talking about.
Well, I think the overall goal should be do no harm, or do as least harm as possible. And if we do some harm, we need to have, in terms of our development, we need to have mitigation strategies in mind. So like Hadley mentioned, if you cut down trees in your yard to build a home, then possibly put in a rain garden on there to absorb some of that stormwater runoff, could be a good idea. But financial incentives, we go back to that again because it controls a lot of things. A lot of people in Dominica have septic systems. I think we need to really start considering, when we put in our septic systems, how we can use some of the natural gas that is built up in those septic systems to be able to use it to fuel several different things, in a house. I remember growing up, there was a gentleman up in Girodale, Mr. Shazo. Mr. Shazo had a system. His entire home ran on natural gas that came from his septic system. So we should have, again, the government should incentivize stuff like that. If I have a home and I'm saying, okay, I'm going to put in a septic system that where I can harness and harvest and use, the natural gas that is being produced, then I should be able to get some credits for that. If we have a community and the community decides, okay, we're going to put in this massive system where we can actually remove the waste and use it as a biofertilizer, sell it to a farm, or someone who's doing agriculture, be able to remove that and sell it to them, the government should incentivize stuff like that. So I think one of the goals should be to really look at how we can use natural resources and incentivize people to use some of those practices in development.
And we talk a lot about our architectural heritage, the importance of preserving the buildings that were so indigenous to Dominica back in the day. But I'm wondering, is there a sustainable development goal that can be achieved from doing so? Were they more environmentally friendly, the houses of old, the buildings of old? Especially you, Jodie, as an architect, I'm just wondering if those were more sustainable, environmentally friendly. And anyone can feel free to jump into the conversation as well.
I'm an engineer, but
Engineer.
I do dabble in architecture.
Engineer, my apologies.
So yes, I believe the older houses, especially the old French colonial house, there's a lot of air coming in. So they had like the jalousie windows. They would have vents on top of their doors, in top of their just below the ceiling, and even the ceiling, the height of the ceiling. I mean, you had. So the purpose of that really is to have the warm air rising up, so the houses are not as warm, and then you would need maybe an air conditioner or a fan. So of course, yes, they were, and they used wood to build. So they were a little more. I think what has happened post Maria, a lot of people think that they automatically needed to switch to concrete roofs. And while that might work in a hurricane situation, it is not so good if we were to get some seismic activity.
Yep.
So a lot of people switched over to concrete roofs, but I mean, the threat of your house maybe falling from a seismic activity is even greater, amplified when you do have a concrete roof. So I think we have to sort of have a balance. I still prefer the French style with the high roofs. I think that is the best fit for our island once they are done properly and once they are strong enough to withstand Category 5 hurricanes. So I think we can model a bit from what was done before and maybe add a little spin, a little modern flair to it. But I think the style before was more suited to our climate. Yeah.
Dr. Byron, Hadley?
Oh, I'll let Hadley jump on the architecture part, but I just wanted to add that, now here in the US, when you go buy homes and stuff, everyone looking for high ceilings, and
we had those.
Yeah, and they call it a design element, because the high ceilings look so nice. But like Jodie was saying, there's a practical reason for doing that. In addition to, you have more headspace, there's a practical reason for doing that. And I mean, I think, the old A-frame ceilings and the dove joints and all that stuff, those things were very good and withstand, strong hurricanes. There are definitely ways now we can improve that and make it even stronger. But, it looked like, it seemed like when they built those structures back then, they certainly took in mind the environmental conditions that we faced in the Caribbean during those times.
I think architecturally, one thing that we've drifted away from was the slope of the roofs back home, and a lot of people wondering like why was so many new homes back home roofs were blown away during Maria and Erica, and I think one of the major reasons was because these roofs are too flat, and we that's something that we have to look at. But as Jodie said, you have draftsmen doing this and not qualified architects. But the steeper the roof, the more difficult it is for any sort of wind to get under and lift it. And if it's also steep, if let's say, for example, you have, for those of you who are looking at, you have a roof that flat, then you have that hangover called the eave. That's very easy to get under it. But if it's steep, that wind is just gonna hit that steep side of the roof and just move up. it won't be able to get under it. And I think that's one of the things that we have to look at architecturally is our design of our roofs and how flat they are being constructed right now.
And I certainly think the importance of financial incentives cannot be overstated, because it always comes back to money. So what is ever the cheapest option is usually what people are going to lean towards. So if there's some sort of incentive to encourage people to do the right thing, then I think they would. But as we are coming up on the 9 o'clock hour, we want to take a break, take a minute to have anyone who would like to call in the program. So I will hand it over to Lambi for the phone numbers, and then we're going to jump on the Facebook Live to check out your comments.
The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. Let me repeat those numbers one more time. 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. Back to you.
Yes, thank you. And let's see what's going on Facebook. So, of course, thank you for joining us. David Johnson, always great to see you. Peony Shirley, good evening. I'm listening in St. Thomas. Good program. Thank you, Peony. Always lovely to have you. Glenda Shillingford, blessed evening to all and welcome home, Simone. Thank you. Henny P, interesting discussion. Thank you for that. Hazel Ann Anthony, hi, Simone. Welcome home. Thank you. Dorian Dorival, blessed night. Greetings to all watching and listening. Great interest. Thank you. Penny, that's a brilliant point, Dr. Winston. Read things that existed in the past. So guys, just kind of take a note of anything that you would want to respond to based on the Facebook Live comments. Petro Labadie, great point. Jodie, Glenda, great idea. Of refilling the bottles. Jodie Dublin Dangleben, I'll be bringing mines to you. And no, not nice. Interesting name, not nice. Isidore, great point. Jody, not nice again, is saying good evening, guys. Interesting program. Kingsley Joseph, blessed night. So thank you everyone who's joining us via the Facebook Live program. Thank you for your contribution and thank you for your comments. But let us get back to the discussion and let us talk about the rivers. Let's dive right into the rivers, figuratively, of course, because I think what we've been seeing over the last few years is just the complete depletion of our waters. And Hadley, I think you wanted to talk about the impacts of dredging the river. So let's go over to you, Hadley, on that point.
Okay, so in my opinion, I think in some cases dredging can make sense, but I'll take it where it hits close to home.
We have a call. Hadley, give us 1 minute. We have a call.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Hello, good evening, and thanks, Simone, and your guest for a very important program.
Thank you.
I think one of the topic you mentioned was environmental education. I think that is critical to have our people, young people, especially from preschool, to get to understand the nature of our country, our island, with all the hazards and all the risks we have. We are a beautiful island with all the experience of nature, with the high biodiversity. And I said the program was developed for introducing agriculture and environment in all the schools, and that was never implemented. I think it's important that people start pushing for getting our kids to appreciate the island we have and how to protect it. Thank you and good night.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Yes, Hadley, back to you.
Yeah. So, like I said, I would think that in some cases dredging can make sense, but I will go where it hits closest to home, which is the village of Kulibistri, where if I fell from my grandmother's window, I would fall into the river. That's how close my house was to the river. And but at the same time, it took Erica to destroy the house. All those years growing up, the river would rage and nothing would happen. And I think I looked at videos of the dredging of the river in Kulibistri, and it hurt because, you know, the river gets strong, and obviously we know what happens when the river gets strong. In most cases, it itself destroys its own banks, and it filters out into the community. And we could see, we clearly saw how much damage that an overflowing river can cause to our community. But I think what the authorities has done with the dredging was, in my opinion, make it worse. I think they think that if they just clear out the rivers, then that water will just drift down and go into the sea. But I think what we need to look into is something called, here it's called stream restoration. I guess in Dominica we would call it river restoration. And that is basically, how do you restore pretty much the banks of the river? Right. And I think that's something that we need to more look into than just dredging and figuring out, let's just clear it. Right now, we're just creating a path for water to move. But we have to remember that there are living, breathing things in the water, in the river. There are certain things that we use the river for. The river is not just there to watch it flow. We use the river to bathe, to wash clothes. We use it for food, so many things. But I think one thing that we need to look into is the restoration or re-establishing the river banks. Back in the day, we used something called the gabion, like the stone baskets, and I haven't been seeing that being used, but it's something that's very important. Another thing is, to re-establish the banks of the river, you might, you remove some stones from the river, but you place it on the banks of the river. You give it dirt and you replant vegetation along the banks of the river. And I think with the whole idea of dredging is something that we really need to reestablish the banks of the river, reestablish the path of the river, instead of just clearing that way for water to move. Because, for example, I remember using the river to cross, using stones and whatnot to cross the river, but there's no stones in the river right now because all the stones are gone. And in my opinion, I also think that the dredging of the river is silent mining of our rivers. And there's more that I would want to say, but I wouldn't go too far. But I think it's somewhat of a silent mining of our rivers and not just dredging, because where are all these stones going to? They're not going anywhere in the community. They're going somewhere. And people don't throw stones away. So I also believe that there's a silent mining of our rivers back home that, if we move around certain areas, we could see where those stones are right now.
Yes, Hadley, hold that point. We have a call. I'll come back to you.
Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
I love the program. Let me get to the point quick. First of all, that was my concern. And the gentleman that was speaking, he made a lot of sense. But where you start first is to understand and know that the person who created the river, why did he put the stones in the river? What is the purpose of the stone? Now, a river, what we call a river, if there is no stone, it is not a river. A river is no river without a stone, without stones in there. Now, the sound you hear when a river is flowing, it is caused by the stones in the river. It creates current. The water hits against it, take different streams, directions, and it falls from a height. It's the stones creating that. If you take out the stone, you're going to have a free flow of water like a lake. And it's going to be very dangerous. Because, for instance, there is a good example of that right now in Dominica, the Baffin State River. They dredged the river more or less down from by KFC, the market side go up. But what you would find is that higher up where the stones are, the river flows very strong. But when it meets the area, there is no stone. You don't see river anymore. You just see some small little stream. Because you don't only take out stones when you actually dredge in the river. You are actually scraping up the river bed. and then you bring it down to the place where the soil is, and the soil absorbs the water also. You know what I'm saying? So that is very important to check on. And so dredging the river, the way they're doing it, is dangerous to the life of the river itself. And the other thing is, my other concern is that in Dominica, we have a forestry division. I remember in my days when I go to the river, forestry division would come if you're catching a fish, they want to get you arrested and all these things charged. But then again, they say nothing about people who dredge in the river and killing so many fishes. You understand what I'm saying? So I don't understand how these things work. People are allowed to dredge the river and kill multiple amounts of fish. But you trying to get a little fish that God say you can just eat to survive, they want to crucify you. Anyway, thank you. I won't stay that long.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Carl. And I think he raises a very, very good point. And Hadley, I want you to finish your point, but I also want to come to you, Dr. Byron, because we have to talk about the importance of the ecosystem in the rivers, because it is part of our environment. And by dredging the rivers, as Hadley has already mentioned, we're pretty much just sweeping away the ecological system in the river. So let's talk about the importance of that. And then, JD, I'm going to come over to you for any thoughts you have on the topic. Dr. Byron?
So a river is a living, breathing system.
Yep.
Right? The chemistry affects the biology, which affects the chemistry. The fluid dynamics in the river affects the chemistry and the biology as well. A river breathes just like we do. It takes in gases and it off gases as well. The faster a river flow, the more churning that occurs, the more, for example, O2 or CO2, that's released in the river. A river always wants to go back to its natural course. Before we were there, before we did any modifications or anything like that, the river's intent is to go back to its natural course. So when you see flooding occurring, or when you see the river is cutting a bank in a place where there's a house where it never used to be before, if you go back and do things like sediment cores.
Byron, can you hold the thought, please?
Sure.
We have a call. Thank you.
Good evening, caller. Go right ahead, please.
Oh, that's not the program. Okay, sorry.
No problem. Byron?
Yeah, so I was saying, if you go maybe a quarter mile in where you think there's no, the river was never there, and you take a sediment core, you will see layers.
Sorry, Byron.
That
I'm sorry. One call. Sorry.
Hello?
Yes, good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, the caller before the last stole all my points. I don't like him.
Understandable.
I was going to call about the rivers and everything I was going to say. He actually said, and he's absolutely correct, huh?
Yes.
In terms of the effects of the stores and stuff. One thing, good program.
Thank you.
I was trying to get to the Facebook page. I don't know what to look for, but I just have to call. What's the name of the show?
So you can go on Q95 FM radio on Facebook.
Okay, lovely. Thank
yes, Q95 FM radio.
Yeah, another point though is that I heard you were talking about the effect of constructing or putting buildings or facilities close to the riverbank or out, right on the riverbank. I really think that's a problem that we're actually observing in Dominica at an increasing rate. Because I've actually seen it myself, whereby people actually try to put their enterprises close to the river, and I think that doesn't just have a pollution effect. I think it also have this what did the good doctor say? Some kind of it affects the flow of the river, right? The water dynamics, etc. Okay. Like case in point, like the river in Louvier, at the beginning of Louvier, by it has been I think in the news of late, right? And I right now people say the river is dry, but the river is not dry actually. It's flowing higher up, right? But then it because of the accumulation of sediments, the sediment accumulation actually causes the river to flow to pass under the stones and the silt, right? And so it seems like it's dry, but it's not dry. but it disappears when it reaches a certain distance. And I think I don't know that is just my hypothesis, right? I think the proximity of construction activities close to the river, I think that has a role to play. Also, I want you to comment on the if there's a causative relation as well with the event of the what do you call it, this verdant growth in the river, which is grass. I want to know if that's a positive effect or negative effect, or what is the cause of that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, caller. Thank you for that. So, Dr. Byron, continue your point, and then we'll go over to the questions that the caller raised, because those are good questions. Thank you, caller.
Yeah, for sure. So I was saying that sometimes you might move in a quarter mile from where the river is, and you take a sediment core, and when you look at it, you will see layers that illustrates, like you might see variations of sand and silt and other things that illustrates that river might have actually been flowing through that area at that time. So the river will want to go back to its natural course. The like I mentioned, the chemistry and the biology, it is all important. So when you remove rocks, you're actually removing hiding places for things like crabs and other crustaceans that can go in there and hide. You also affecting the flow dynamics, because the water tends to want to go around those rocks. It can increase or slow down the rate of flow. So, one of the callers mentioned when you remove the rocks from a river, it's not a river anymore. It's actually a canal. It's like a channelized, concretized canal when you remove all the rocks from the river. And he made a good point in that the water is still flowing, but it dives down under the rocks and the silt, so that it has to find somewhere to go. So that's what it usually does. And what happens is that all the sediment that is in there, because the river cannot flow how it used to, the natural aquatic vegetation that should grow there gets replaced by vegetation which we call more like terrestrial vegetation, that would be on the bank or further inland. There's now there's more soil, more sediment. There's more places for the roots to take hold, and the river is not flowing there again, washing them out. So the whole ecosystem, the whole dynamic of the river and the plant community and the animals that frequent those plant communities changes as well. So you have major impacts to the ecosystem, on the river ecosystem, when you do things like dredging, or when you do things like throwing. One of the things I saw, as a young high schooler growing up in Dominica, there was a development in a certain area where I used to go swim and catch, crabs and crayfish and stuff like that, pick guavas and eat till my belly full. There was some development, and they actually dumped all the material from that development into the river itself.
And we're seeing that now.
Yeah, and what used to be like a 15, 20 foot wide, river now came down to this little 4 foot wide thing that you just couldn't access and couldn't go in anymore. Those were one of the things that, sort of impacted me in terms of going into environmental sciences. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing in front of my eyes.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Byron. We have a call. Give me 1 second.
Good evening, caller. Go right ahead, please.
Hello? You hear me?
Could you raise your voice?
Yeah, I would like to know what produces the oxygen the fish in the river breathe? What produces the oxygen?
Any thoughts on that, Dr. Byron? The oxygen, the fish in the river?
There are two things. There's natural diffusion of oxygen into the water column in the river, but also you have the algae that grows in the river, and the algae also produces oxygen. The algae is one of the major producers of oxygen on the planet, for example. So there are two places it comes from: natural dissolution and algae growth.
So when you say natural dissolution, explain that for the people do you know.
Okay, so for sure. So it's oxygen dissolving into the water. So what happens is gases flow from a place where there is a lot to a place where there's not a lot. So during the day, during the night, the oxygen in the water goes down, and in the morning, when you have photosynthesis occurring, the algae will release oxygen. But because the oxygen is also low, some of it will diffuse, will come from the atmosphere and get dissolved into the water.
That
Yeah,
helps, caller?
Yeah, I just wanted to know exactly, and not only Melon, for the listeners too.
Yes, great point. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, so thank you for that. Dr. Byron, will you finish with your point?
yes, I was.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Jodie, let me come over to you for your thoughts. And then let us also talk about the two very important points that one of our callers raised, building on the riverbanks as well as grass in the river. So, Jodie, your thoughts, and then let's talk about those two very important points. And again, we thank our callers and we thank our Facebook Live folks for the comments. Facebook, I'm going to come back to you in a little while to see what you're saying.
I mean, that is a topic that's dear to my heart because I remember growing up, I used to go with my dad to the country, and my main agenda was to get VO, to make a VO. Right now, I can't get VO in the rivers.
Wow.
They are non-existent. I mean, you have to go really high up in the hills to get VO. And like I said, the dredging, the removal of the stones, all these, you eliminate some of the breeding grounds. So not only the fish, you have the crayfish, you have the VO, you have all these fish that breed in the little nooks and crannies. So you're eliminating some of the different species of fish that we have in our rivers. You know, I mean, I used to go with a little piece of bread on a string and get fish. Right now, you can't do that anymore. So I think we're really doing it blindly. We think it's something that is going to help when we do have like heavy rainfall events. But I mean, we're not looking at it as a long-term thing. We're not looking at the long-term impacts of dredging and how it damages our aquatic ecosystem. So I think we need to do a lot of research. I remember I did an EIA for the Indian River. There was a lot of silt that came down, and we had to do a really, really comprehensive methodology statement on how we are going to distill the river. We had to get a badge. We had to make sure that we didn't have any motorized equipment in there. I mean, so all these things, it shows that we really need to do more research. We need to do more hydraulic studies of our rivers. And all these things are one thing, I believe. We go in blindly, just thinking that we just need an excavator just to remove everything. But the long-term impacts are what we really need to focus on, and we don't do that. I don't think we're doing that enough.
Yeah, and we still have our two questions on the table, but Jodie, your response kind of leads me to wonder, well, what is the alternative for dredging? Hadley, Dr. Byron, any thoughts come to mind? Because I think that is what it begs the question: what is the alternative for dredging the rivers?
I mean, I said it, re-establishing the river, trying as best as possible to re-establish the original path of the river. And we could do that with simply, we remove some of those stones, but we place them on the bank, we get some dirt, we put there, we start planting vegetation along the river banks. Those roots moving through that dirt and through those stones are going to solidify the river banks once again. And then we will have our rivers back. The stones in the river, in my opinion, is something similar to the speed bumps on the road. The stones are also there to slow down that water, because whether you know it or not, every river runs at a slight slope. If it's not a slope, then it drops in a certain area, and that water is pulled down towards the sea. So that's one of the things that these stones does. It also slows down the water, so we don't have that constant rush of water. The only body of water where you don't see stones pretty much sticking out is, for example, you have a lake. There's no real need for stones in a lake, because there's no moving water. If you look at the sea, all rocks are underneath, but the river or streams are the only body of water where we literally have rocks sticking out, and it's there for a reason. But the simple way to get our rivers back is to do that: reestablish the streams, restore the banks, you know, and there's also certain things we could do. We could literally create shelves in the rivers that would prevent it from just rushing down, but dropping, little 3 foot, like little waterfalls where the water would come to the edge and drop and then move again. So I think the alternative, which in my opinion should have been the first option, is the re-establishing or the restoration of the riverbanks. And that is rocks on the riverbanks, good soil that can now speed up the growth of trees, shrubs, trees, and even vines, along the riverbanks. And then we will get our rivers back. But if we keep just dredging, we're just taking everything out of it.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you. Thank you, Hadley. I'm coming over to you, Dr. Byron. But something else I want you to comment on as well, because I think one of the major concerns that we're seeing here in Dominica is that companies are simply dumping construction material into our waters. So talking about pollution, contamination, and the ecological system being disrupted, I want you to comment on that. Do we have a call coming in, Lambi? Yes. Okay, so a call is coming in.
Thanks, caller, for joining us. Go ahead, please.
I just want to confirm what your last presenter just said. If you realize that there's not many countries in the world have rivers like us, water running from the mountain to the sea. The only place I saw that is in Japan. And what they did is really present Cuban baskets to stop the flow of water, because damage from water is equivalent to volume of water and distance. So if you can break the distance by dropping the slowing down the water, then there's less damage. But I think that's going to prove to be one of the biggest environmental disasters to Dominica. That dredging of water, all the rivers are going to change, and they're going to change into muddy slum in a while. You see, just swamp, what used to be rivers. And when the rain falls, it just comes down and do even more damage. There was no studies done. They just went in and put caterpillar in the rivers and destroyed the rivers. Thank you and good night.
Yes, thank you, caller. Thank you for that. Dr. Byron? Oh, we have another call?
So,
okay, good. Go ahead, doctor.
I mean...
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. A call is coming in.
You guys will
Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, there is a gentleman in your program that keeps saying a lot of good things, man. I just love
Thank you.
how he breaks this thing down, because I've been talking to a lot of people about this river thing, and just addition of what he's saying with the stone also give it spreads the water. That's why you have rivers are large. The flow is large. The stones there, it spreads the water. So when you take the stones out, the river gonna close in. You're gonna have a lot of water disappearing and not knowing where it's going to. But the other thing again, when we have deforestation, people building houses and these things, the river is going to disappear. Because one of the things that they're not telling anybody, the river is not created by everyday rain falling. No. Even when rain not falling, there's that huge capacity of water flowing that doesn't come from rain. So it is from something else that creates the river. The rain just actually comes after the evaporation of water. When the water go down, you have this evaporation and this process taking place, and it comes back down in rain. Then you have a large quantity of water. So water come meeting water. That's why you have a river overflowing your banks. So what I'm saying is that once you start cutting down your trees, and the building codes of Dominica in particular, or the way, the practices in building, I think they should look at that, because now you have everybody just claiming they have a piece of land somewhere close to a river, cut the trees, and the river now start drying up. There's a lot of rivers that people can pinpoint in Dominica that dried up, and they were There were strong rivers. People used to bathe, do everything here, and this kind of stuff. But because of people now came in, cut trees to build houses, the river is non-existent anymore. So all these things are very important, and I want to say great show, man. I love this program.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for your contribution, caller. Dr. Byron.
Yeah, so the caller made a really good point when he mentioned that even when you don't have rain, you still have flow in the water. Those of us in the water quality business, we call that base flow. And he made another really good point when he spoke about deforestation. Because what happens is your trees, your soil, your grasses, your shrubs under, what they do is that they slow the flow of water down. And then that water is allowed to penetrate into the soil, and it contributes to what they call the base flow. It hits a layer that it can't go anymore. So like a rock layer, and it starts flowing towards the river. So that is called your base flow. And that is what feeds the river when, even during the dry periods and we still have water in the river. But there is also a larger point that needs to be made, and I'll get to the dredging issue, is that unless we take a holistic approach to development in Dominica and everywhere else, we are going to face these issues. And by holistic approach, I mean we have to take into account agriculture. We have to take into account education. We have to take into account the environment. We have to take into account water quality. We have to take into account air quality. We have to take into account social and financial dynamics. And we need to have a holistic approach, something that looks at all of these things. Dredging, we have to ask one question. What is the purpose of dredging? Sometimes dredging is needed in areas where you might have some sediment that is contaminated, and that contamination is coming back up into the water column. Sometimes dredging is needed. Sometimes dredging can actually cause some of these problems. An alternate to dredging, like Hadley said, is stream restoration. But in my opinion, if we have an area where there's so much sediment in the river, I would say just let it flood. Just leave it alone. Over time, nature will correct itself. It goes to what we call nature-based solutions to solving our problems. Nature has the best methods and strategies to solve its own problems. So what does that mean? If we have communities that are really close to rivers, they might need to move. Hadley said his house he could jump from his window into the river. I would have kind of liked that as a kid.
Me too.
In terms of safety and the impact. And the other thing we need to consider too is having a house right in a river floodplain, a riverbank, is not good for the river, but it's also not good for the people that are staying in there, because it's a health and safety risk to the residents of that community, but it's also an ecological risk to the river as well. So relocating people, and in the future when we're doing these developments, to not put them so close to the river in the river floodplain is a good idea. But again, we have to think about this holistically.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Byron. Do we have a call coming in? Yes, we have a call coming in.
Good. Thanks for joining us. Caller, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
How does the earth replenish itself?
Yes, it does.
It does, and explain to me exactly how it does.
Anyone? How does the earth replenish itself? I think we kind of touched on that a lot with what Hadley was explaining.
Well, I'll give a basic example. When you have heavy rains, these heavy rains will wash sediment into a water body like a river, for example. That sediment might get washed down to the ocean. That sediment goes into ocean and it might subside. It contributes to the formation of new rocks, etc. That sediment that was lost from the ocean, from the landscape, is the things like the phosphorus and the iron that was lost in it is replaced by, especially in the Caribbean, is replaced by dust coming from the Sahara Desert. So we wonder why our tropical forests are so lush and verdant. even with all this rain, is that they're getting replenished by dust coming in from the Sahara Desert. So everything is connected. Everything is a cycle. Everything builds upon each other. So that's just one example of how the earth replenishes itself.
Yes, thank you. And let me come over to you, Jodie. Your thoughts. Do we have a call? Yes, we have a call. And Jodie, I'm coming to you.
Good evening, caller. Go ahead, please.
Hello, good evening. How
Good
are you
evening.
guys doing?
Good.
Good. Dr. Winston, Dangleben, and the rest of the panel. Good evening to you guys and to the listeners.
Good evening.
I just want to give a few points to what Winston was talking about. Byron Lennon here, man.
Hey.
So, how you doing? So, I have
Lennon, if I don't know your voice by now, after 4 years of being my roommate in college, well, how are we on my feet?
Go ahead, Lennon.
Yeah, that's my college buddy.
Right.
But I love the subject tonight. I love the conversation tonight because it's really important. And you cannot talk about river nourishment, river conservation, without including the entire aspect of the hydrological cycle. And through the experience I have had through the past few years, trying to give back based on my experience, I realized there is a huge disconnect, and I'll tell you why. A few years ago, one of my past students who worked at the Met office, we had a conversation, and I asked, are you guys taking, that was before Erica, are you guys taking water readings from the mountain? And she said no, because they don't have staff. They needed, people to get up there. And I said, do you realize by the time you see the Roseau River is flooding, that means there must have been serious rains in the mountain. And if you don't have information as to what is your volume, your annual volume of rain in your water catchment area in the mountain, then you cannot have accurate measures of protecting your rivers. Adding to what Winston was saying, river protection is not just about living by the rivers and dredging. It has to do with your forest. What type of forest you have? What is the water budget? Do you have, through the past few years, have we had a change in forests where they absorb more water than they conserve? There are some plants that absorb more water than others. Are these plants that were next to the riverbed or the river catchment areas have the vegetation change over a period of time? Do we see that change during the hurricane season when trees are down and the plants are growing back where they absorb more water, where there's more evaporation? These are some of the things that we have to think about. Because what I have noticed through the years is the volume of water in the river has decreased. And that could be as a result of several factors. But unless you have scientific data and information, you cannot properly do any conservation. So recently, the Met Office have been collecting stream measurements, which I have the privilege of getting some of this documents. And I think together with the Met Office, which deals with the condensation part of the hydrological cycle, then you have the forestry, which deals with the evapotranspiration, the forest part of the hydro cycle. Then you have Ministry of Environment and the other aspects that deal with that hydrological cycle. I think these different ministries have to find a way to collect statistics, share statistics, share data, and ensure that data can be properly analyzed to get a solution for our river conservation effort. Without this scientific data, without proper analysis of this data, then we will just be making up our solutions with no backing.
Right.
And I think that is one of the major problems, because what I have realized is there's information sitting on certain shelves and it's not being utilized. You see what I'm saying? So we see how our river patterns have changed over the years. And one of the things I know is that a river does three things. It erodes, it transports, and it deposits. And There's activity based on the volume of the river at the time. So in high flood stage, when it has a lot of rainfall, you have a lot of undercutting, you have a lot of erosion, you have a lot of creation of channels. And at the time that river volume drops, then it deposits that on the riverbed. What I have noticed has been happening, the river volume has not been strong as it used to be before. So material is deposited further and further upstream. And as a result, when heavy rain comes, you have flooding in new places, you have creation of new channels, you have old channel beds that have been sitting dormant for years. All of a sudden, they become raging torrents. So there's a lot of dynamics going on here, but the only way to have a proper solution is by collecting that scientific data, and that scientific data is not collected overnight. I think we have recorded history, we have local observations, we have farming communities, we have the Ministry of Agriculture. I think all the systems need to understand they have to work in the best interest, not just for their institution, but in tandem, as Winston said, a holistic approach, looking at the entire system of the hydrological cycle and how we can tie it into the conservation of the river. At this point, I know the Met Office is collecting information on several rivers in Dominica. That will become helpful, but that is not a process that's going to change overnight because nature has its way of doing its things in its own time. But I think when we keep on collecting that information, understanding that we have a common purpose and we can work together, sharing that information, then we'll have better solutions for conserving our rivers.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Just share that with you guys tonight.
Yes.
And have a good evening. I'm listening.
Yes, thank you, Lennon. Thank you, Lennon. And thank you for calling in and making a contribution. Lennon is part of our internal community that recommends programs as well as recommending guests. And I also want to thank Mr. Omar Monell, because he as well makes a lot of great contributions. As a matter of fact, he recommended both Byron and Hadley for this program. So Omar Monell, I know you're listening, and we want to thank you for the contributions that you continue to make to our programs. So let us talk about your reactions, your thoughts on the dumping that we see going on in the rivers. Jodie?
I have nowhere. I don't know where to start.
I know.
Working in the Ministry of Public Works, we get a lot of reports. There have been numerous cases where concrete trucks, after they finish pouring, any drain, any on the side of the road, they would just dump concrete. And I really don't think do they have a brain? Do they know what they're actually doing? And even in the drains, when you do that, remember it's cement you're pouring out. It creates little puddles. When rain falls, you have mosquitoes breeding. I mean, we just have to do a lot more control at a policy level. Have some fines, fine them.
That's what I was about to say.
We have people actually sending us photos and videos of people dumping, and it just nothing is done about it. And so I think we really have to set those policies and really set fines for dumping. We as a ministry, we have certain dumping areas that are regulated. So for any building project, any road project, we have designated areas depending on where the activity is taking place. People bypass those and they dump where they want solely because the areas are too far. So they maybe think they will be spending more money to transport the debris to our sites. And nothing is done. People dump on the side of the roads. Just today, again, I went on site and there was garbage in a plastic bag on the side of the road. I mean, we have to do better. And I think people are just not aware of the impacts that dumping and indiscriminate throwing of rubbish does. And I have to come to that as we're talking about dumping. Even our rubbish collection system is so archaic. And I'll get flack for it, but I have to say it, it's so archaic. How could we move from a skip system where you had, if it's 2 or 3 skips, the skip was a big bin per community, people would dump their rubbish in and it can be closed. Right now, people are putting individual plastics on the side of the road. Rats, dogs, Plus, rubbish is strewn everywhere before they come to collect. I mean, how can we call ourselves the nature island when we're doing those things so openly? I mean, it's baffling to me, and I think we just have to, I don't know, something
Do
needs to
better.
on a policy level to curb those sort of behaviors. I mean, it's very upsetting to me.
Yes, it is very upsetting. It's absolutely very upsetting.
Every time I see those things, it hurts my heart because you have rubbish just strewn all over the place, garbage in every community, because that is how we collect rubbish now. We've gone away from the skip system and just have rubbish on the side of the roads.
Yeah, and it's so sad because I came home yesterday and the first thing I saw turning into my lane is the same thing you're talking about. The garbage just strewn all over the road. And yes, it was picked up in the morning, but overnight, think of the amount of rodents and dogs that probably went through that trash. So I want to come over to Byron and Hadley. Do we have a call? Yes, we have a call, guys. 1 minute.
Good evening, caller. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening, Lambi.
Hey, how you doing?
Good evening.
Good evening to the doctor and whoever the other guests are.
Good evening.
Yes, I'm just tuning in. I am from Layu village in the Commonwealth of Dominica. And it is appalling to see what is happening in the Layu River, on the banks of the Layu River. I was there some 2 weeks ago. When they dump all the concrete steel or the concrete and the steel from the whatever building they demolish. And the rivers are just being decimated in the nature isle. And it is high time we do something about it. And it's not only the concrete and steel, there's a particular bush or weed which came from Guadeloupe. It wasn't indigenous to Dominica. We did not have that yet. It's since Gadakan started doing his thing in Dominica when the batch go to Guadeloupe. So that thing came back to Dominica, and now it has taken over almost everywhere in Dominica. And to see what it is doing on the riverbanks, on the Layu riverbanks. The Layu River used to be the longest and largest river in Dominica. It is no longer the largest river. Certain places where I was scared of bathing when I was growing up as a boy because they were so deep. Now you can walk in the river there and it will not reach your knee height. So I believe it is time. I'm talking about the dumping. Dr. Simon talked about the dumping of garbage on the roadside. I think the legislators need to go in Parliament, if they have not done so, or they need to revisit it and increase the penalty if they have already done. Let it be a deterrent to people so that they will not dump indiscriminately on the side of the road and on the river. Somebody cannot dump, you take them to the court and then they charge them $50. No, it has to be something that will hurt their pockets. As I say, it will be a deterrent. So thank you very much. Great program.
Yes, thank you.
I'm listening.
Yes, thank you, caller. Yes, and I think it is so important that we're having this conversation because look, it's already the hurricane season, right? So these conversations are very important because the hurricane season comes every year. So are we going to be dredging the rivers every year because of, we're afraid of flooding the banks of the rivers. We're afraid of houses getting flooded. There has to be an alternative. So I'm really happy we're having this conversation. Let's take the call and then Dr. Byron and Hadley, I'm coming over to you guys.
Go ahead, caller, please. Caller, are you listening? You're not paying attention.
Yes, please call back. Yes, Dr. Byron Hadley, your thoughts on the dumping in our rivers?
For me, I'll say that there's nothing really that we need to add to the rivers. we don't need to add, which is what we're doing right now. And we're adding waste. I mean, the river was put there for us to take from. You take a bath, you take water, you catch fish, stuff like that. But it all boils down to, are there any penalties in place for certain things that are being done? And for all I know, up here, there are always people inspecting construction sites when some maybe even the most basic form of construction is happening, to make sure that rules are being followed and whatnot. Every construction site has a place for trucks to wash their tires before they could get onto the main road. Something that we might figure out is so simple, but yes, something so simple as washing their tires, much less to clean inside those trucks with leftover concrete from a site. So I think Jodie said it right. There are no penalties, there are no fines, and there is no requirement for those companies to be able to find a proper way to deal with their waste. So to me, that's the only way that we could see less of those, dumping of trash and waste material into the rivers, is for there to be some very harsh penalty for the people doing that. And the citizens have to be a part of that project. If you see it happening, you make a complaint. There should be a hotline that you could call to say, hey, there's a construction happening and I don't think that they are following proper protocol. You all need to send somebody out to make sure that this is happening.
Right. And it's just
people
alarming
have
when...
to
Go ahead.
Yeah, the people have to be on board. They have to be on board. Like right now, I'm seeing a lot of people talking about on the live right now, people talking about the constant destruction of the Layu River. But the person in question is allowed to do that because there's nothing in place. There's no rules that has to be followed. So I think that there needs to be rules. Like, for example, me working in the planning department, when I worked there, it doesn't matter if your property goes all the way to that body of water. There's a certain portion of that land that you cannot construct on. So if you take your money and you buy that property, there's going to be what is called a setback line, which is an invisible line that you cannot construct. You will be able to plant a tree or maybe put a little fire pit area on there, but you cannot construct on there, So that's another thing. That's a planning division. Like, how close can somebody build to a river? And even if it's a residential building, there's waste produced in your house as well. And if you have that suck away a septic tank system, if it's not, let's say, for example, it's not properly built, or we have one of those little tremors or whatever that we have, and that the ground and that's destroyed. Now you have waste leaking into the river. So even in residential construction as well, it's something that has to be checked.
And and Jodie is absolutely right, because it's just alarming to hear that videos are being produced and sent, and yet nothing is done. I think we have a call, so let's take the caller, Lambi, please.
Caller, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, it's me again. Yeah, as usual, you all keep taking my points, but it doesn't really matter. Earlier on, you were talking about the impact of deforestation, right? And the impact of, I think, urbanization. I think one of the panelists spoke about the effect of the flow, in terms of the flow from the roads and whatever have you. One kind of bright idea that kind of came up to me in my head was that you see, after when you have this roof, right? This place in the forest that was already there, and then because of this replacement of the forest with something hard, through which water would no longer be able to penetrate. You have the water being displaced onto an adjacent lot, thus causes an increased flow rate. But I think maybe one policy that could maybe be enforced, or maybe sort of unenforced, is to have builders put less concrete in the yard so the water could have to percolate in the soil. Because we have a tendency of just concrete all over yards and so for for conveniences. And I think that actually if more builders, if more houses or homes are constructed that way, I think we have less runoff. At least to a certain measure, less runoff in the mountains, right? And you have more percolation into the soil. And thus we'll have a more, like the good doctor, one of the panelists mentioned base flow.
Yes, Dr.
Okay?
Byron.
We'll have less flood events, and we'll have like a higher, more constant base flow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Another thing on the rivers again. But I live in Libya, right? And I was really privy to this whole dredging thing. And trust me, every time I passed and watched the job that was done in the river, I'm tempted to just throw a couple stones in the river.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I'm not doing it is because I think I'm gonna get arrested or something. You know.
Mm-hmm.
But with that said, I think maybe something could be done to have. Am I there still?
Yes, John.
Yeah. Something could be done maybe to have some kind of relationship be established between the operators of those dredging initiatives and the respective village councils. You know, and when I say the respective village councils, I guess I would expect the village councils to be informed. You know, maybe to have some expert on as one of their council. You know, the councillors. You know. To be informed as to what are the guidelines that should be met with respect to respecting the integrity of the river. You know, because sometimes these people they're hired and I mean I wouldn't blame them much because they don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those who have education they would know of the consequences of of those actions, but sometimes you're just a small back operator, or bobcat operator. So you've been given a job to dredge or to clear up a little stream yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean that is your forte. So I think that should be looked into.
Yes.
Another thing, though, is the policy instrument, right? That has to be brought into the fore. That will cause more compliance. I don't know if we already have policy instruments that are not being enforced, or maybe we need more of it. I'm tending more towards the fact that we do have them, and they're not being enforced.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but like the good gentleman said, I think the gentleman from planning, he mentioned, but I don't know the extent to which all of these things that he mentioned are being enforced.
Right.
Okay. One more thing that I think earlier on, one of the other gentlemen spoke of having a holistic approach. And he's absolutely correct. Okay. I think we actually need to have an environmental, ethos in Dominica, and maybe even an agro-environmental ethos.
Mm-hmm.
I think this actually causes us to have a bit more respect and appreciation for the environment, because as we move to tourists and the likes of the nature island of the Caribbean, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to pass in town and you would take a survey and ask average Dominican, the extent to which you actually care for the environment, or the matters of the environment actually occupies the mind, I'm sure you would find from that survey that rate will be very low.
Right.
Okay. So I think we have to try to cultivate an environmental ethos that we could be one with nature, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
If that's not done, we just feel like fleas on a dog, just parasitizing on the dog. I'm taking the benefits and just bleeding the dog.
Right, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, caller, for your contribution. Dr. Byron, over to you. So let's talk. I wanted to make sure we address that caller's concern about the grass in the river, and then let's circle around for your recommendations as we get ready to wind down the program. So, Dr. Byron?
So remind me of the grass in the river. It's been
I think he was
while.
concerned that the rivers are drying up so much that now the grass is growing in the river.
Right. So it's kind of goes back to a point I made earlier that once you have put so much soil in the river, the aquatic vegetation that would normally be there is no longer there. And now you're having it's not an invasive species, but you're now having plants that were not there before taking root and taking hold in the river. And it'll only you can only get rid of it when you have a really strong, storm that can come and clear it out. And in terms of the the dumping in the river, unfortunately, this is a global problem. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've taken in stream cleanups here in the US where you find things like old tires, you'll find refrigerators, you'll find beds. I mean, just name it. You'll find all sorts of things in rivers. So it is not a problem that is unique to Dominica. I wanted to point that out. But we do claim to be the nature island of the Caribbean. So we have to act differently and we have to think differently. And we are held to a higher standard.
Absolutely.
Dumping in the river construction material does not only present an environmental risk to the ecosystem, it also presents a health and safety risk to the people who are going into the river, right? Imagine you have a strong storm that carries a piece of concrete with rebar sticking out into it, down into like a 10-foot deep pool, and you have no clue that that's in there. You jump in there to go for a swim, and you don't know where that piece of rebar could puncture you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be a matter of life and death. So there's not only an environmental health risk, but it's also a risk to the health and safety of people.
Mm-hmm.
Personal responsibility, I'll go back to that. I may sound like a Republican because they always talk about personal responsibility up here, but personal responsibility and policy. Jodie mentioned it, Hadley mentioned it, or callers mentioned it. There has to be policies and there has to be some type of reprimand, if not necessarily a punitive damage, but punitive measures, but there has to be some type of reprimand or some type of consequence for impact for dumping in the environment. And personal responsibility, I mean, doesn't it look bad to you? I mean, to see that? I mean, like, how can that be okay? How can it be okay for you to dump your waste materials in the river or just dump your trash by the side of the road? I mean, how does that look okay? I just, we are supposed to be stewards of the environment. We're a Christian nation. We claim to be a Christian nation. We claim to be Christians, or whatever religion you're following. We claim to serve a higher purpose. That purpose calls us to be good stewards of the environment. So our philosophies and our deism need to follow, what we do personally on a daily basis.
Yes, thank you. Very, very well said, Dr. Byron. Now, let me take some of the comments on Facebook and then let's circle around for your final comments. So kind of just keep in mind the comments coming in Facebook as you make your final comments for the program. So we have John Allington. There is an urgent need for reparative forest restoration after Maria Magola Rock. I'm so sorry Wave could not have come to be with us this evening because you guys were invited. She says, there are so many issues, Simone. It's not funny. One of the biggest perpetrators is Gadakan, and little to nothing is being done to stop him. Wave Whitey Kubuli advocates for viable environments have reached out to the authorities, and so far we have been ignored. And please don't let me get started with the dumping on the island. Margot, thank you so much for that contribution. John says, Ian John, I am a forest officer and I am tired of getting off my vehicle and telling concrete truck drivers not to wash their trucks on the side of the road. Our legislation and enforcement are weak. One of the criteria for any concrete plant should be an area to wash trucks when they return to base. Nature Island should be more than a cliche. So going back to what you said, Hadley, about, special arrangement just to watch the tires. Let's see who else we have. Oma Monel, great to see you. And again, thank you for the recommendations for the guests. A question for Jodie. Is the Ministry of Tourism working in conjunction with your ministry to solve this problem? So guys, take some notes on the questions you will be responding to as we wind down. Henny says, are recommendations from environmental impact assessments being implemented? Glenda, very good point, caller. Less concrete in the yards. Most people deviate from having a little garden area in their yards. Thank you so much, everyone, for your contribution. Oma, again, in your panelist opinion, will the construction of the Indian River bypass increase flooding in the town of Portsmouth and Picard? So thank you, everyone, for your comments. And let's go over to our panel. We had some great contributions. So thank you, everyone on Facebook, as well as our callers, for adding such great contributions to the conversation today. So as we wind down, Jodie, let me come over to you. There was a question directed to you, so you can respond to that. And just let's wind down the conversation for the evening. You're muted.
So I think the question was, does the ministry work with Ministry of Tourism?
Yes.
Yeah, we do work hand in hand. So any projects that Ministry of Tourism has, any building projects, then we work on those. So we actually do a lot of work for the Ministry of Tourism on that front, yes.
And your final thoughts?
We only have one Earth. That's all I can say. We have one Earth. It's our only home. We have no plan B. So that should ultimately be the defining context for our own human existence. You know, our forest, our volcanic, our soils, our river and streams. I know Hadley and Dr. Byron are in the States, but I'm sure that the experiences in Dominica are that's what molding them, right? And so that is what defines our Dominican identity, and the use of our land for food, for our livelihood. I think all these represent our economic base, what helps establish, a green Dominica, what we boast of. And we shouldn't, like right now, I don't even think we should be boasting and calling ourselves a nature isle, because the practices that we have now are not in keeping with that brand. We do not act like we are from the nature isle. And so I think on a societal level, it's a call for us to get back that spirit of honoring what we have on our coat of arms. We have to take care of our earth. And I think we have to create the environment, as we said, education from a young age. We have to instill in our kids that they need to take care of the earth. The earth is their only home. And I think that there are different things that we can do individually. I think I talked about the whole consumption, what we consume. We have to be very conscious about what we consume, the things we consume, what we eat, what we put on our bodies, our clothing, just our livelihoods in general. Find alternatives to energy. Even rainwater harvesting. I have an extensive thesis on rainwater harvesting that we have strayed from, that we can, because every time the Wasco takes water, people are complaining. Why are y'all complaining? Rain falls mostly every week in Dominica. Our grandparents always had a little barrel outside with rainwater with a little crocus bag on it to prevent debris from going in. Why can't we go back to that? Frugal innovation is what we need to do to get back taking care of the environment and being the stewards that God intended us to be. And so we can find alternatives in business, especially. Look at more sustainable practices in your businesses. Look at how you can reduce your carbon footprint in your homes, the different steps that you can take to reduce your carbon footprint, and looking at different renewable sources. I think we each have a role to play. We each have to be advocates. We have to raise awareness and change our mindsets. I think that is the hardest thing that needs to be done, that we should be working on right now at a policy level and at an individual level.
Yes.
So thank you for having me, Simone. I hope I could enlighten people on what we have to do and what we need to do here in the nature island. And so we each have our roles to play.
Yes, thank you, Jodie. Thank you so much for being a part of the program. And of course, to check out everything that Jodie offers in her beauty and wellness line, you can visit her at jadiesnaturals.com, JAYDESNATURALS.com. So jadiesnaturals.com. And we are so proud that one of her business goals is sustainable development. So Jodie is, one of the folks we certainly want to support as she continues to build her brand and include sustainable development along the way. So again, www.jadiesnaturals.com. Hadley, let me come over to you for your final thoughts. And Hadley, I can't have you on the program and not ask you about the music industry. You know that, right? Oh boy, I think he turned up his eyes at me. So while you present your final thoughts, just give us, 2 seconds on your thoughts about the music industry in Dominica, because we know you're heavily involved in music in Dominica as well.
Okay. So for me, in closing, I will live with this document that was published in 2015 by the United Nations. And I knew about it, but my friend Henny, he's on the live right now, reintroduced it to me. And basically, last I checked, Dominica is currently part of the United Nations. We have an ambassador to the United Nations right now. And that document is dubbed, is entitled Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And that was put together and launched in 2015. So that was a 15-year plan that was put together by all countries who are part of the United Nations as to how we can develop this world, but sustainably. And like Jodie and Byron said, we are just a small footprint in that big world. And maybe not every single thing on that plan would apply to us. In some cases, maybe finance wise, but we also have a carbon footprint. And I think if the powers that be, who will, in my opinion, instrumental in this project, would have come home and maybe introduce that document to the people and take certain things that they can implement on the administrative side. For example, take certain things from that document and implement it in forestry, implement it in planning and maybe it's happening, I don't know. But I think also sensitize the people, introduce them to the document, let them see which part of the document they see, hey, but we could do that in our community. That's something that we can do. We don't have to wait for village council to do it or government to do it. That's something that we can do. More projects. We only wait for Community Day of Service to plant some flowers on the side of the road, flowers on the side of the road, because we figure out right now, Community Day of Service, the government have to give us some money to plant stuff. We could raise funds on our own. We could do things, and there's a lot of things in that document. It's 41 pages long that we can implement on a community level, on a city level, on a town level. So for me, I would encourage anyone who is interested to just go on the United Nations website and find that document. Again, it's a 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And I think there are points in there that we could do on every single level that can help us in the development of our country, but sustainably. And I would like to thank you for having me on. Big up Omar Monel for thinking of me. He and I talk a lot about those types of things. So when he reached out to me, I was like, okay, cool, fine, I'll do it. I'll do some research and whatnot. But before we leave, I would just like to touch on the current situation that we all Dominicans are facing right now with this 12-year-old girl who was abducted, and is missing. And I saw a lot of people, leaving comments as to why are you guys talking about that now? There's a situation that we have to deal with. This is something we actually spoke about it prior to going live, and it's something that's there to every single one of us and to the family of this young girl. You are in our prayers and to our thoughts, and the people out there who are searching, from the police officers to the average man who are out there searching. We would like to say thank you for those who are donating maybe water or food supplies to the people who are out there searching. And we just hope and pray that this young lady is found alive, safe, and is returned to her family, and this person is also dealt with to the full extent of the law, in my opinion. I just want to say that. So yeah, I'll end there.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Hadley. And yes, we were certainly going to mention that at the end of the program. So thank you for putting it in those very eloquent words. So again, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, Dr. Byron dropped off. His internet interrupted, so he's no longer with us. But we want to thank him for being here. And again, we want to thank everyone who joined us. This is Roots Connections on Q. And we had Dr. Byron Winston, Mrs. Jodie Dangleben, and Mr. Hadley Joseph as we looked at sustainable development and the price that we are paying for the environmental impact on the environment. So again, it was wonderful being here with you. Don't forget to jump on q95da.com for all the up-to-date news. Especially, we'll continue talking about, that missing young girl, that 12-year-old. And as Hadley said, our thoughts and our prayers are with the family and everyone who is out there looking for her. We certainly hope that she's returned to her family safe and sound. So again, this has been Roots Connections on Q. I'm your host, Simone Mathieu, and we will be back in 2 weeks with yet another engaging program. So we look forward to being with you. Don't forget to follow Q95 FM radio on Facebook, as well as Push Past 10 for more information of how we are bringing our experts. We are tapping into the expertise of our Dominicans at home and abroad to talk about topics of national importance. So again, Q95 FM radio on Facebook, as well as Push Past 10. So with that, I bid you a good evening, good night, and thank you for being here. Until we meet again in about 2 weeks, you take care and stay safe out there. Thank you.
Joe! Rastafari!